All right. We talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba on Monday. We talk about don't scout the helmet. It's going to be really hard not to scout the helmet here because Sam LaPorta from Iowa, 6'3", 245, kind of the same size as one George Kittle. 4.59 40, pretty fast for tight end, 35 inch vertical, 10 broad, 4.25 shuttle, which I actually think is, and when you look at the tracking data, our great data scientist, Pavel Babicek, Udit Ranazaria, looking at the tracking data coming up, one of the more impressive athletes just by looking at that model. So there's a lot of boxes checked here for Mr. LaPorta. There's also been, of course, Hawkinson now being a very useful tight end in the NFL for the Vikings, Kittle being a 5th-round pick for the 49ers, being probably the best all-around tight end in football. There's a little bit of an impulse to want to project here. I look at him 7th in college football in yards per route run last year. Not a long, not a great like down the field guy, but that's an Iowa offense that doesn't like going down the field. Drop rate about 9.4%, which is high for a tight end. You don't want that. So a mixed bag here, but there's some positives to Sam LaPorta.
I like Sam LaPorta. I think he's a very good athlete. I think he's right up there with the better athlete in this draft that we're talking about because I gave him both that 7 mark, the very good athlete. I think he moves smoothly. He runs his route. I just happened to be watching a little bit earlier his movement in the combine, and I really liked watching what he could do, right? Strictly in the combine. Watching him on the field, there are times where I'm thinking, gosh, where is he? What is he truly as far as a difference maker? Comes from I love the program. I love Kirk Ferentz. I love anything to do with it. I know he's, there are times people want to take their shots, but what they usually get out of an Iowa player is usually they're getting someone who's got a lot of talent. Usually they understand football. They have a passion for football. I'm lauding you Midwesties, of course, but I like this football player. I think he's a 2nd rounder. I think he can be a good developing starter in this league. And to your point, he doesn't come out and rip it up in year 1, but he develops well. If I understand, I have not, of course, dug into his character, which I used to do. And that helped me a lot, by the way, as scouts. It's such a good feeling to know when you have a guy who works his tail off every second of the day, usually like a lot of the Iowa guys do. You want to give him a check mark there, right? You'll take him any day. I can't speak to that, but I do think this guy's effectiveness on the field. Of course, he's not a big-time blocker. He'll put his nose in there enough. He'll work it, like I said, like any of these very good athletes. But he's in that 5 range as a blocker, adequate range as a blocker. I think, again, good football player. I think he's a 2nd rounder. I'd build with him.
It's interesting, right? Like, I don't want to go 12 rounds on this idea, but I do want to bring it up. Like, one of my friends, Sage Rosenfels, who's an Iowa kid, he played at Iowa State. He contends, and he and I have sort of thought this idea through, that for some NFL positions, playing at some of these schools that are not as, for lack of a better term, explosive, can often be better for you, right? So, if you're trying to play tight end at USC, or you're trying to play tight end at, I think UCLA is actually fine, but like there's a lot of these sort of more schools on the coasts where you're not playing an NFL, you're not playing tight end like you would in the NFL. So the adjustment period is going to be so much different. In college football, it's not optimal to play a NFL pro style offense because of the hash marks and because of the speed and because of the scarcity at the position, right? Like there are only 32 NFL starting tight ends, and every year in college football there are maybe 5 or 6 guys that'll ever be anything, right? So why would you build an offense around a tight end in college football? It doesn't make sense. But if you are one of these teams like Iowa, right, where you are not getting the tippy top athletes at wide receiver, halfback, and so forth, and you're playing in a conference where you're not going to get killed for not having those guys at those positions, and you run a pro style offense, I do think you develop fullbacks and tight ends better than other schools do.
I agree.
So that's maybe a little bit of a thing to think about. And if you're thinking about college football, free advice for everybody who's trying to run college football teams: if your path to greatness is to try to get players in the NFL, think about those edges as opposed to trying to develop the 80 millionth wide receiver because Ohio State's already a full round ahead of you in that. So that's just something I thought about. Did that at all come into your mind when you were scouting players or picking players when you were a team builder?
Yep, no question about it. I mean, systems, schematic approaches. Again, what I had mentioned earlier, the ability to sit down with Bill Belichick, or Mike Smith, or Dan Quinn over these last 20 years. No question that came up. So without beating your point to death, I really like what you're saying about it. I think there's definitely merit in it.
Yeah, Sage has always talked to me about wanting to like put the Shanahan offense into a college system. I'm like, well, you got to sell it somehow, and I think selling it would be to say we're going to develop players to play that system. Now, Sage, by the way, was Brock Purdy's offseason quarterback coach, and he taught them because Sage played for Kyle in Houston, and then of course like there was the connection. It's kind of cool how that all came together, and maybe that can be a thing for other positions